When we think about relationships and connection, I see it in three buckets. There's relationship to self, there's relationship to others, and then there's relationship to community. And it's this outward effect. And because I said self-awareness drives performance, I think you all know where I'm going with this. We really have to start with ourselves.
Welcome to the Seismic Shift podcast, where we explore the shifts that are shaking up the way that we live and the way that we work. Y'all, I am so excited today to introduce you to Taylor Johnson, who has absolutely, positively changed the way that I work and the way that I live. He's been one of my significant seismic shifts in the last 6 months. So welcome, Taylor Johnson.
Thanks so much for having me, Michelle. It's great to be here.
Okay, so I'm going to share with our listeners how we met. So it was back in May, and it was at a Bart Foster of Business Outside, and it was one of his leadership conferences in Austin, Texas. And I was the keynote that kicked it off on a Sunday night. And I stayed, which I usually don't do. But Bart said, you know what? So much of my leadership conferences are about connection. Why don't you just stay the whole time? And at the very end, on the last day, Taylor Johnson was the closing speaker. And I got to see him and hear his words of wisdom. And he didn't actually talk about the topic that we're going to talk about today, which is getting a hold of your calendar and how to own your cadence and your connection, your rhythm, your meeting rhythm. That's the topic of today. He didn't really talk about that. He talked about winning formula. He talked about your, I think it was your operating, what did you call it? System?
Your operating system, your user
operating
manual.
system. I mean, I remembered his presentation. It was so powerful. And I reached out to him and I said, you know what? I need Taylor in my life, but I didn't exactly know how. So, and I also, y'all, did not realize that I was in burnout mode, because I was enjoying so much of what I was doing. I was going and blowing, giving speeches here, running to the airport, flying to Denver, giving a speech, flying to Austin, giving a speech, running a leadership academy, doing everything that I normally do that typically I get energy from. And it was at this point, so the timing was such that once I reached out again to Taylor and I sat on the other side of the Zoom, the camera from him, I said, Taylor, I've just reached burnout mode. And I told him what it felt like to be me at that time. I said, I love what I'm doing, but right now I am at empty. I feel like I'm a pinball in a pinball machine, just being shot around the pinball machine and not having ownership of my calendar. And I'm absolutely exhausted, mentally, emotionally, and physically. I said, this is not how I want to live, because I'm so excited about the work I'm doing. Can you help? So enter Taylor Johnson, who is a performance coach, an executive coach, and he began with Division I. He actually, on my alma mater, Auburn, he was a performance coach with Auburn. He ended up at the San Francisco 49ers, and then he ended up in the gaming, the e-game industry. And then he transitioned to a high-level executive coach where he brings in the skills of for performance coaching. And today, I want for him to share his story with you, and what just do not tune out. Keep tuning in, listeners, because you will learn from him how to own your calendar and develop this winning formula that will change your life like it changed mine. So thank you again, Taylor. And will you share with the listeners your story?
Totally. Thank you for an amazing intro. And I'm so glad that Bart brought us together and we're able to jam out and do some work together. So my story. So, I'll fast forward and just get to the NFL. I remember my first NFL game, and I remember standing on the 50-yard line. We were playing the Houston Texans. I was working for the San Francisco 49ers. And I'm standing there with 5 of my former players, and you'll love this, former players from Auburn. And I had 2 on the Houston Texans, 3 on the 49ers. And we're standing there like, we made it. And it was a very surreal experience of being in college and helping them develop, and like one day hoping they got to the NFL, as I was hoping to get to the NFL too. But I have a confession. Being in the NFL, or really just football in general, I never loved the game of football. And that shocks a lot of people because like about 10 years of my career was coaching in football. What I loved was preparing individuals for competition, for game day. And so much of that was really creating, facilitating the environment and understanding what are the nuances, like what are the foundational skills and what are the things that need to be true in order to have somebody perform at a high level for as long as possible. And for me, it was never about like the game itself. It was about the people that were participating and wanting to play a bigger game. And that's why it was easy, in my opinion, easy to then transfer from traditional sport into esports, which for those who don't know, this is professional video gaming where individuals will, these are like 17 to 25-year-old individuals who are playing video games for a living, getting paid great money, working for professional organizations, traveling all over the world, and in some cases playing tournaments for millions and millions of dollars. Yet there was no conversation around performance or health and wellness and longevity and things like this, even connection, which is a foundational skill set that needs to be developed and practiced. So that jump for me just made sense because it was an opportunity and it was like the transfer of training, which then again led me into executive coaching and startups, really building high performing teams. And so where I'm at now with the work that I do in my private practice, just work with amazing individuals like Michelle and other great executives and leaders and sales executives. I also work with Liminal Collective. And so Liminal Collective, we're a global network of performance executives or performance individuals who help people from business, sports, military, and creative arts really get unstuck and shift perspective. And so I share all that because in my journey, what I realized when I took a step back is we're all performers. We're all performers. We all have an arena we step into. It doesn't matter if you're a doctor, lawyer, soccer mom, stay-at-home dad. We all want to do well. And maybe we won't be world champions. Maybe we're not going to be, an N of one at the very top, elite percent. But we all have a space we want to do well in. And I think that's like a fundamental desire of human beings to step into the fullest version of themselves and to figure that along the way. And so that's where, Michelle, when you and I started talking around like this whole business athlete concept, that's where the winning formula really started to come into play. And so I'll share a bit about, the business athlete and then how that turns into like the winning formula session. And then we can get into the connection cadence, which was so meaningful to you and stuff that I love doing with individuals as well. So the business athlete for me is an individual who appreciates the skill sets, the foundational components of elite performance. And you don't have to be an athlete to take on that persona. It's just having the appreciation and the coachability to understand that you can't do this alone. And there are people that have come before you that have played at a really high level, and success leaves clues. And so it's not just looking to sport, it's looking to business and military and creative arts and academia, and really kind of taking this Renaissance approach to, okay, what is all available and how do I make that meaningful and useful to me? And so part of what I love about the business athlete frame, if you were to look at it through the lens of sport, is this intentionality. It's being intentional. It's taking a step back and saying, what are we optimizing for? Okay, in football, it's Super Bowl. NBA, it's championships, right? There is something that we want to train and put ourselves in a position to be successful for. And then you can work backwards from that. And it's also appreciating whatever stage and phase that you're in. As you and I experienced, Michelle, going through that session, it's like we go through different stages and phases in our lives, and we're always in a state of becoming. And so that winning formula session is a slowing down to then speed up. And oftentimes high performers, well, we're just not really great at slowing down. We're always on to the next thing. Like you said, pinball machine, just bouncing off the sides, lighting up the buttons. The only rest you get is when maybe if you kind of come back to the backstop, but then you immediately pull that plug and you're shooting back out. That's you coming back to, your home base and then immediately going back out on the road. And so that 2-hour session really is an opportunity for you to slow down and ask some important questions of, well, who have I been becoming? Because you're always in a state of evolving as an individual and always acquiring new skill sets. And so the slowing down allows you to really appreciate and understand, well, what are the raw materials that have gotten you to now? And so much of that conversation that I created is built on the inspiration from Joseph Campbell. And for those who aren't familiar with Joseph Campbell, he was fascinated with mythology. and specifically around the story in the character in specific stories of like this call to action and crossing the threshold from the normal world into this unknown state. And in the process of doing so, they meet mentors and guides. They develop different values and skill sets. They battle dragons and demons. Maybe they get the girl, maybe they don't. But they come back to this normal state world transformed and changed. And we go through that on a moment to moment, phase by phase, year by year, over a course of our lifetime. And that's a really important thing to really honor and acknowledge, and then ask the question, okay, now what? Now what do I want to do with this useful information? Does that feel like I'm hitting
Yes,
pretty good, Michelle?
absolutely.
Cool. And I'm curious, what was your experience like going through that session? Before I unpack a little bit more, like as I was going through that session with you, what was really coming up for you?
Winning formula session. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, that was powerful. So Taylor asked you to think about we focused on my professional life and think about it in 3 different eras and have a title for each era and jot down like and then he would ask questions about each of those eras and what brought you joy, who supported you, what took away joy. And boy, it just I realized, because how often do you really sit with a facilitator who asks you these questions where it just highlights what brings you joy? And I loved learning and growing and being a part of a team and supporting one another. I like to be a part of a positive environment with optimism and growth as the values. And that just became so clear to me that that's those eras of my life is when I've been happiest and joyful. And so I'm trying now, as a result of that winning formula session, to capture that again where I am right now in my life. And that's what we're going to do with you all. Is then he helped me after that session is to own my calendar. And I'm calling it a connection cadence, because I believe in my work on connection is that we as humans have to figure out how to show up as our full selves every single day. So it's not just, oh, I'm going to manage my time at work and then home is different. I'm going to show up as a professional person and then home is different. We have one life. We have one calendar, and we have to figure out who are the most important people in our lives that will help us reach our goals, and then look at our calendar and how do we structure it in a way that sets us up for success? Because going back to what Taylor was talking about, I described that pinball machine, and then you described it even better with constantly being, how would you tossed around with all the lights? I didn't have ownership of my cadence at all. I just said yes to everything, and yes to whenever a client wanted to meet. Yes. Whenever somebody wanted me to give a speech. Yes. And so at the end of the day, I absolutely had lost kind of my energy and what really brought me joy, just as a result of not prioritizing and not coming up with themes that Taylor's going to walk you through. So it all started with the winning formula, which brought to light what really brings me joy, and then able to look at the calendar and establish those priorities, identify those priorities, and then figure out a rhythm that helps me be successful. I love the language you use, Taylor. Becoming. We're all becoming. We're all
Yes.
evolving every single day. And
That's it.
sometimes it takes again, when I met Taylor, I knew I wanted to work with him, but I didn't know how or what it would look like. But sometimes you just get those feelings. I need this person in my life. Yes.
Yeah. Love it. Great recap there. And while we don't have 2 hours to do the actual deep dive today, what I want to do for the people listening, and I'm going to create a worksheet after that you can go through, and there'll be some prompts so you can listen back to the podcast. Because my whole thing is like, I really want you to get the lesson. I really want you to get the impact and have at least one shift, right? Even if you just take one small action that's in alignment with your commitments that leads you closer to the goals that you want, to me, that's a win. And so what I want to do today is let's frame up how we can do a version of the winning formula that gives you a sense of this awareness. And so for me, and so much of the work that I do, that Michelle experienced my other clients, is self-awareness drives performance. Self-awareness drives performance. And it may sound intuitive, but when you really drop into that, some of the best performers often have a deep sense of self-awareness. They're aware of their values and their goals. They understand what irritates them, what pisses them off, what brings them joy. They're aware of the types of people that they like to be around that really give them that fuel and energy, and vice versa, the types of people that drain their energy. And so much of the slowing down is giving you a chance to take inventory of what are all the variables and factors in my life. And it's not good, bad, right, or wrong. It's just information. And then what you choose to do with information is then how do you then create the plan moving forward. And so I love the whole self-awareness drives performance. And what I'll encourage listeners to do is we're going to do this exercise called Best of Me. Now, this is adapted from the work of Dan Coyle, who wrote Culture Code and Culture Playbook. I have a little bit different spin on it, but I encourage you to check out this book because it's amazing, just a framework of working with different teams. So the prompts go like this. I'm at my best when. I'm at my worst when. You can count on me too. What I need from you is. And I'll have those in the worksheet and we can put those in the show notes as well. I'm going to focus on the first two. I'm at my best when, and I'm at my worst when. And the reason why this is important, so I want you to imagine if you were to take a sheet of paper and draw a horizontal line. Okay, so imagine a continuum. And I want you to draw this line and I want you to create thirds. So, drop in 2 lines so you have 3 parts. In the center, I want you to write best of me. On the far left, I want you to write worst of me. On the far right, I want you to write worst of me. Now, the reason why I draw it in this way is because if in performance, we talk about this inverted U, which is the Yerkes-Dodson curve. And that explains the relationship between performance and arousal. And so if you imagine this inverted U, and if we start on the far left, low performance, low arousal. Okay, so that's like if you were waking up in the morning, you're just exhausted and incredibly tired. You feel like the world is crashing down on you. You're not really motivated, not really interested. You're not going to have really high performance, right? That makes sense. Now, if we go to the other side, far right, high arousal, low performance. Okay, think of a day when you maybe had too much caffeine. I'm talking like too much. Okay, you're jittery. What are you doing? What are you not doing? You're probably not as productive as you would like to be because you can't even touch the keyboard because your hands are so shaky, or you can't even really focus your thoughts. Okay, or another example could be if you're in that fight or flight, where you're so overstimulated, over aroused because of the workload and things that are on your plate, you can't even think about what needs to come next, right? So high arousal, low performance. And I want you to think about this inverted U and look right in the center. Right? This is your sweet spot. This is an optimal zone of performance. This is when you've had just enough sleep or the right amount of caffeine, where you have clarity on the direction that you want to take things, with what the next step is. For me and the clients that I work with, it's always about clarity, confidence, and capacity. Those are my 3 C's. What we're always going after. So now if you take that inverted U and then just flatten that line, then we've got this continuum. And so I encourage the listeners to think about, okay, let's start with the far right. High arousal, low performance. I want you to write out all the things. What are the people, the environments, the tasks? What are the conditions in which you have really high arousal and really low performance? Okay, so take some time to write that out. Then go to the far left. Low arousal, low performance. What are the environments, the people, the conditions that give you in that state where you're just not getting a lot done? You're just not motivated, not happy. You're feeling that burnout, which could be on both extremes, by the way. And then think about, okay, the best of you. What does that look like? What does it feel like? What are you doing? What are you not doing? Who are you around? What are the environments? What are the attitudes, the beliefs? And so this is a way for you to start mapping the variables of what allow you to be at your best, and also a signal and awareness to when you start to dip into those extremes where it takes away from your performance. And you can use performance in any context you want. Some people get a little bit standoffish when I talk about performance, but think about just living your best life or doing the things you want to do. Performance, the definition really is just the execution of a task or function. So go ahead and fill in the blank. Performance of what? That is most meaningful to you. And in a moment, we're going to talk about that as it relates to our connection, right? With self, with others, and community. So that's the first exercise, that best of me. And then when you do that for right now, you can then expand that and say, okay, well, how has that been true for me over the last year? or 3 years, or 5 years, or 10 years. And so you can start to look for patterns and themes as you look backwards and think about, oh, well, how have those conditions been similar and what's different? And that gives you even more information to then say, okay, in this stage and phase that I'm in, what is most important? What am I optimizing for? Going back to that question around intentionality, because your intention focuses your attention. And in my opinion, your attention is your most valuable resource. Your time gets impacted because of how you spend your attention. And if you don't give your time a job, well, then you're just working for your time. So we need to think about that when we build out our calendar. And so what that does is it starts to give you this map, right? We're just trying to collect information. That's really what the winning formula is giving you information and insights. If you want to go a level deeper, you can think about, well, what were you valuing in these different stages and phases? What were the beliefs? What were the behaviors? And you start to create this very rich texture of who have you been becoming up until this stage and phase. Then the question is, well, what do you want to keep and what do you want to change? And so for the topic of this conversation, you want to optimize for your calendar, but more importantly, your connections. So then you get to ask the question, well, what are the relationships or connections related to my health and my relationships and my career and my hobbies that are most meaningful to me in this stage and phase and based on the goals that I want? And so these become your areas of opportunity. And so, Michelle, I don't know if you remember, but what part of the exercise that we did is we said, okay, of all of the variables, let's stack rank them. So I'm going to encourage the listeners to stack rank them in order of importance, because it's one thing just to have like a shotgun approach to all the things you want on your calendar. It's another thing to say, okay, of the things that are here, what's most meaningful? Like if I had to have a constraint and say, okay, let's really think about in terms of connection, how do you want to list this out? So this kind of ties into when we think about relationships and connection, I see it in three buckets. There's a relationship to self, there's relationship to others, and then there's relationship to community. And it's this outward effect. And because I said self-awareness drives performance, I think you all know where I'm going with this. We really have to start with ourselves, right? So what does that look like in terms of putting your oxygen mask on first? What are those variables that are going to help you really put yourself in position to be successful? And again, define success for you. And so I'll put some questions in the worksheet around this too of, okay, so what are the variables to be at your best? What are the things that need to be true? Maybe it's going for a walk in the morning. Maybe it's making sure you eat some healthy food. Maybe it is the social connection, but first for yourself, you have to do your own journaling and your own practice to kind of get you in the right mind state, right? Everyone is so different. So there's no judgment. There's no right or wrong answer. Again, this is an exercise in you really exploring the different variables that you can start to play with and test, because all this is just one experiment. Right? It's a big social experiment starting with yourself, and then this outward experiment of like, how do you want to interact with the world? How are you choosing to navigate with the world?
And Taylor, one of the things you helped me with that, when I said I had been saying yes to everybody, but at a great cost to me, because I wasn't exercising as much as I wanted. And so we actually put a routine together where every single morning, he even helped me. Monday, Wednesdays, Fridays, I do Pilates. Tuesday, Thursdays, I do weight training. Saturdays and Sundays, I spend time in the park with friends and walking my dogs, so that now I know what to expect every single week when I'm not traveling. And for me, my energy, it's best if I knock that out in the morning, and then I get my exercise. And then we even looked at the social connections, like, okay, who are your friends that you want to see in your calendar? Because one of the things that I ask people is, if you showed me your calendar, would it accurately reflect your priorities in your life? So then Taylor and I went and looked at, okay, I make sure I see my friends every Monday morning for coffee. That is a non-negotiable. When do I see when my daughter comes home from college? So I'm just trying to get you all to think about, as Taylor is talking, I wanted to give you some examples of how I realized that I was, again, saying yes to everybody else, but wasn't being good to me at a great cost. And now it feels so much better to have that connection with myself embedded in my calendar.
Totally. Yeah. And again, I acknowledge you for making that a priority. And I love what you said there too. It's like, show me your calendar and I'll show you what you really value. because your values drive your beliefs and your beliefs drive your behaviors. And that's a huge thing. When you get that, and sometimes it can be pretty confronting. I've worked with individuals where they say family is their number one value. And then we look at their calendar and they have zero family time. And again, there's no judgment. It's saying, okay, what do we want to do about that? Because either that's a value that's just not being met and we need to figure out what's getting in the way, or it's an aspirational goal, which is okay too. And then that changes the frame of how we go about addressing it, because getting a goal is very different than acting on your values. There's a nuance there. And I love what you said. So it's tying that together. So that's the self, right? So it's, what are the variables to be at your best, writing those out. And then what I like to do too is, what's your ideal? I talk about like continuums. Like, what's your ideal? If you had your perfect day, no constraints, what would happen? And then let's be realistic, because that hardly ever happens. What are your BAMs? I call them BAMs, BAMS. What are your bare ass minimums? And if you were to do a BAM, even in the slightest amount, that's a win. And I think that's important, especially for high performers and executives, where sometimes they can feel it's like an all or nothing, where the to-do list is so long and there's so much to take action on that if they can't do it to the level in which they want to, then it's just not a success. And sometimes we need to hunt for those wins. And so oftentimes it's reprogramming and saying, okay, well, even if we do a 15-minute walk, yeah, it's not a 60-minute workout, but 15 minutes stacked over the course of the week is still a great win. And even for that day, because you get so much of a benefit of being outside, walking, and being in nature, 15 minutes is going to get you far more of a lift than if you just try to power through and just continue to do the work that you need to do. So I call that out, BAM. So that's going to be another thing I encourage people to work through is like, okay, the ideal case, and then I don't like to call it worst case because it's not. It's like, okay, bare ass minimum. But just to do this, that's a win. So that's self. Now let's talk about others in community. So again, the way I frame this is, what are you optimizing for? Because there will be different stages and phases where, sometimes there's a season of no, and you're not going to say yes to things that are outside the scope of what you're trying to accomplish. Like, I know Michelle's working on her book, therefore she's much more focused on making sure that she's getting her time in to write a book. So therefore that's a filter or a boundary that's in place where, if it's some random thing that's going to take her away from her like dedicated weekend to write, that's going to be a no for her, and really honoring that. And so thinking about whatever goal or stage and phase that you're in can help you create the boundaries or filters for how you choose to set up your calendar and what is a yes and what is a no. And I'll be honest, this could be really hard for people. Okay. It could be very challenging to say no. And an easy way to get, well, not an easy way, I find a way to get past that is say, hey, right now it's a no because of this project that I'm working on. And after that, yes. So it's not a no forever. And oftentimes that helps. Now, if you want to continue extending the timeline because you just want to extend your season of no, you don't like saying a hard no, you could do that too. I had a client who did that. I'm like, that's fine. Do what you need to do. So that's community itself. And another way to think about it is like, what are the areas of life that you want to factor in? So for others in community, okay, so maybe it's career. So thinking about your career relationships or thinking about your personal relationships, family relationships, romantic relationships, because all these areas are different and also interconnected. So it's looking at the big picture. The other thing I like to put in for community and others is centers of influence. And what I mean by that is like being around the people that bring you so much inspiration where it's a massive leverage point. Leverage in terms of your own intellectual growth, your own well-being, or having like that ripple effect of when you're in this center of influence, things just get better. Like the relationships develop, networking just expands. Like think about that and how you can get more of that, because that's really what's going to help continue to drive your own growth and evolution. So we talked about self, we talked about others in community. Let's get a little more tactical. Now, is there anything else you want to add, Michelle, before I transition into this?
Yeah, I wanted to say just listening to you talk about this again, Taylor, made me realize when you said, yeah, and Michelle knows that one of the priorities this year while she's on sabbatical is to write the second book. And so you and I worked on mapping out the first week and the fourth week of every month are my creative days. And I just realized that I didn't embed. I have meetings with Marshall. I have meetings with my book editor, but I didn't embed in my calendar time to creatively think. And guess what? I don't know about you all, but unless it's on my calendar, I don't prioritize it. So I need to do a better job of I need to put on my calendar, this is my time. Even if I just write down one sentence or one quote or have one idea about the book, I need to have it on my calendar. So thank you for that
Yep.
reminder.
Love it. So that's a great point too for those that were listening. The first model or the first iteration or version of your calendar, the way you set it up, it's not going to be the right one. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It just doesn't mean it's right yet, because you actually have to pressure test it. Like on paper, we could come up with the most elaborate, beautifully periodized plan. And believe me, I get caught up in this too. Like my background is all about blueprint designing and working backwards from game to annual plans. We can make the most gorgeous annual plan of how things you ideally could go. The reality is it just doesn't go like that. And that's okay. It's the act of having the intention of having it go that way and having the scaffolding in place, the framework that allows you to be more flexible and adaptable, because then you have a little bit of a guide rail and you already have that much more awareness in yourself of how you're choosing to navigate. And then the choice points become a little bit more clear because you've already have that structure in place. And so, Michelle, like that's a great follow-up to think, okay, well, now I need to go back and look at my days, my weeks, my month, and say, okay, well, where's my creative thinking time? And then what it sounds like is a BAM, like a bare ass minimum, is like, even if it's one quote or one passage or a voice note, like I'm a huge fan of voice to text, like capturing that and then putting that in a place, having a process to capture, like that is a win. So we could talk more about that later, but I think that's awesome. That's a great pickup on that too. Okay, so let's transition into a bit more of the planning. And y'all, it's pretty straightforward, basic stuff, right? And what I mean by that is you don't need to go over the top and get super intricate. And I would encourage you not to, really. Encourage you to think like pick a couple things and just test it. And test it for the next 2 to 4 weeks and just see what happens. And so when I think about planning, I like to start big picture. And I said, okay, over the course of the year, and again, we're going to use the theme of connections because that's what Michelle's all about. And I'm huge on relationship building too. So let's think about connections, big picture. Over the course of the year, maybe what are some variables, what are some themes or some experiences that you would want to have that are really related to connection? And so this is actually a good time to do this as you plan for 2025 and look back on your year so far and be like, okay, how were my connection events? What did that look like? What did it feel like? What brought me joy? What was really draining? And then think about 2025 and how can you optimize for more of the good stuff and less of the, we'll call it negative stuff. So thinking big picture, annual plan, dropping those in, because you're also going to want to factor in the seasonality of life. And maybe like you work in a sales position and there's different sales cycles, or there's, the quarterly planning or whatever it may be. You want to think about what are all the variables that could either add to or take away from your connection. So starting big picture, annual, then go a layer deeper and think, okay, quarterly, on a quarterly basis, how many connections do I want to have? Like I work with a lot of salespeople, and a big thing we talk about is our centers of influence and prospecting. So those are a specific type of relationship and connection. So how do I want to plan for that? What are the ways in which I could set myself up for that? And then personally, it's like, well, I want to have time with my fiance. And so what are our trips? Like, how do we fit in our trips? So I'll just speak for myself. So what we do is we do one big annual trip, and that's like our couples goal setting retreat, where we take 4 to 5 days and we go someplace and we plan out our next year. And that's one of our things that we've always done. And then quarterly we do like a long weekend, and then each month we do a day trip, and then each week we have a day night, and we put it in the calendar. Some people think it's crazy, but we schedule it a month in advance, and we just go by that. If we need to adjust it, we do. So that's where we're going with this. So start big picture, annual, then go quarterly and say, okay, what kind of connections do I want to have on a quarterly basis? And then think monthly. Okay, so in order to get my quarterly goal, this aspiration of having, let's say, six really quality connections a quarter. Well, from a monthly basis, what would that need to look like? And then thinking about, okay, well, what activities would I want to do? What environments would I want to be in? Who do I want to be around? So it's really this focusing exercise. And what I'm doing for those listenings, I'm kind of taking my hands out wide and I'm kind of bringing them in more narrowly. So you want to like change the aperture and think about how do I get more focused and more intentional.
I love the example that you use, Taylor, with your fiance. And I don't think it's crazy at all. I think that's a winning formula, right? That is a beautiful connection cadence of what I'm trying to get people to see is that we have to be so intentional with what relationships are important to us and then look at the calendar and embed time to spend with those people annually, quarterly,
Yeah.
monthly, weekly, daily. I love that. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's been, again, for me, it's been a game changer because both my fiance and I we're business owners. We're building our businesses and we're both like really competitive. And so it's a lot of fun for us to run in parallel. And by planning ahead and having the connection cadence that we do, and I'll even go like a step further. So, like, yes, we do our annual, our quarterly, our monthly, our weekly, and then daily, even daily, we have a connection moment at the end of the day where we ask ourselves three questions. We say, um, is there anything to clean up? Meaning, is there anything that happened during the day where maybe something was misunderstood? We're just trying to get ahead of resentment because we all know that resentment is just like toxic. Um, and what are you grateful for? And what were your favorite moments from the day? And we do that every day. Doesn't matter if we're in person or not. It's a voice note, it's a call, it's an in-person conversation. And then on a Sunday, we basically plan out our next week and we do a debrief. And I'm happy to share those questions in the notes if people are interested in that. But that's been a game changer for us. And I think, Michelle, I talked about it too. It's like you could even do that with your team, obviously remove the romantic component from it. But it's like, hey, what does it look like to have that cadence of connection and asking ourselves the deeper questions to understand, hey, are we still vibing? Are we still on the same level? Are we talking about the same thing? So we can go there with this.
And I love that because even with hybrid work environments, even with remote environments, I'm advocating that my clients bring their people together quarterly for face to face so that they can have moments of collaboration, of connection, of check-in. I call them team covenants, the agreed upon values. Let's review. How are we doing? Are we living the values? Are we living our covenant? What are we winning at? What can we do better? Even if you're working remotely, we need to come together quarterly to see each other and have these conversations. And it needs to be embedded in your calendar or all of a sudden the year is going to go by and you're going to say, shoot, we never saw each other. And that's not good.
Yep. Love that. And the key part to that too is it's the commitment and the discipline to continue to do it. And it's a skill, right? It's a skill that you need to continue to refine and push forward and reiterate that.
Excellent. Okay. So where do we go to kind of wrap everything up?
So a couple more things to kind of give a little bit more color to how you can manage your schedule. So we talked about annual, quarterly, monthly, and then weekly. So something that's really powerful for a lot of busy individuals is actually taking a step back and thinking about, okay, how am I spending my time? How am I allocating my time? And what kind of time is it? Is it maker time or manager time? And so Paul Graham wrote an amazing essay called Manager versus Maker Time. And I encourage people to look into that. We could put that in the show notes. Essentially what that's saying is manager time are the meetings, the tactical, the execution. Maker time is that creative think space. It's working on the business, not in the business. And giving yourself the ability to have differences in those types of times is really important. Because as you know, it's the context switch is real. So if you have the ability to have a maker only day where it's all creative work, by all means, like that's incredible leverage. And then sometimes you don't have that luxury. So you can break up your day, whether the first part's manager time, next part's maker, whichever combination works best for you. I think the last little bit that I'll share on the calendar stuff is, and this goes into your connection cadence with checking on the covenant and really checking in on, like, are we doing the things we said we were going to do? is having a Monday and a Friday meeting where Monday is a briefing and you're setting the tone for the week and the agenda and setting the intention and the attention. And then having that checkpoint throughout the week and going about your day. But on Friday, debriefing, and the biggest part of the Friday debrief is, what did we learn? Like, what did we want to do? What did we actually do? What did we learn? And then those lessons turn into actions that you can pull through into the following week or the following weeks or months. And I think the biggest thing for me and everyone that I work with is I'm constantly asking the question, well, what are we learning? Because if we're not learning, we're not growing. And it's this constant state of evolving and pushing yourself, expanding, because the more you can expand in your knowledge, the more you then grow, and that knowledge becomes useful knowledge because you start to change your behaviors in different contexts, which then is wisdom, right? Cross-contextual knowledge in different situations is true wisdom. And the more wisdom that you have, if you imagine, this right triangle, the more wisdom that you have, the greater opportunity potential for performance. So bigger the base of wisdom, the higher the opportunity for potential performance. Okay, so I'll do a quick recap here. So we started off with the business athlete. We talked about what that really looks like in terms of a frame of how you show up. It's the intentionality and how you're directing your attention. Then we talked about, well, what's the goal? What are we optimizing for? And thinking about, how am I going to put myself in a position to be successful, defining that. And then we talked about, well, what does that mean for me? Self, others, community. And we started with the best of me exercise. You're looking at the continuum of when I'm at my best, when I'm at my worst, and really figuring out what's that sweet spot. Then from there, we talked about, what does that look like for community and others? And then what are the variables that I want to start to plug into my calendar and make more readily accessible to have me be at my best? And I think at the end of the day, really for me, what it comes down to is when we think about ourself, others, and community, another spin on that is human, humans, humanity. We'll start with the human first, asking the question, who am I? Then humans in the team environment, who are we? How are we going to come together? Then humanity is, well, how might we? How are we going to have an impact? What does an impact look like? What does it feel like? And then kind of comes back to the first part, well, how do I put myself in a position to show up for myself, to show up for others, so that we can accomplish that goal?
Boom. That was incredible, Taylor. And I'm just sitting here thinking about high performance, and I'm thinking about if there are listeners out there who tuned in and learned from your wisdom, if they are leaders of a team, if they begin on a Monday with even a 30-minute call with their team members saying, let's prep for the week. What are everybody's priorities? What do you want to accomplish? What are your intentions? And if they circled back on Friday and just a 30-minute call, again, it doesn't have to be a formal in the conference room or even a formal Zoom, just a 30-minute call. How'd we do? How did we grow? What did we learn? What can we do better? I'm telling you, I think that would significantly improve the performance of these teams. So that's my biggest takeaway. And I hope that you all can grow from that. I also wanted to add another thing that I learned that we didn't have time to cover today that I learned from Taylor is I'm on sabbatical this year to write my book. So I'm in a very unique situation where I have complete ownership over my time. So when we looked at my calendar, we themed it out. And that's been the biggest game changer for me because I have complete ownership of my time. We were able to look at all of the verticals of my professional life, verticals meaning my podcast, my speaking business, my executive coaching business, my leadership academy business, my book writing business. And we're able to take those verticals so that I don't feel like a pinball in a pinball machine anymore. And now we do Tuesdays, just podcasts. Wednesdays, just executive coaching. Thursdays, just executive coaching. Fridays, speaking and reflection. And just having those themes and feeling like I have more control over my calendar, that's been the biggest game changer for me. So thank you again, Taylor. Thank you for taking the time to be on the Seismic Shift podcast. Thank you to all of my listeners who tuned in, and I hope you took notes and go back. We're going to include lots of information in the show notes because this really, Taylor has absolutely elevated my performance and elevated the joy that I feel in doing what I love. Can't thank you enough to everybody, and have a beautiful afternoon. Bye now. Thank you for joining us on the Seismic Shift. And before you go, can I ask one favor of you? Do you mind sharing today's episode with a leader you know? The power of this conversation is found in your using it and sharing it to create real connection in your life. Lastly, I'd like to thank Loyola University New Orleans and the Terra Firma audio team for helping bring this content to life.